I have a special guest, most winning at NNU, coming off an amazing season, and he's given us some time today just to chat about where baseball is going. And so help me welcome Coach Joe Shaefer. Man, what a wild ride you had this year. What were some of the ups and downs you had?
Oh man, going into the year, um, we thought on paper we had a pretty special team. We thought it was probably the most talented team that we've had since I've been at NNU. And that doesn't always mean a whole lot, other than there's a lot of excitement about the possibilities, um, and we started out okay. Started out the season pretty well, but then we went down to Pueblo, Colorado, and I think we played a 4-game series down in Pueblo and gave up like 40 something runs in the first 2 games. And we're kind of like, oh gosh, what is happening right now? It was kind of like, the guys were feeling pretty good about themselves until that little 2-game stretch. But it was a good little checking point for us, to really dig deep and kind of block out the noise and realize, you gotta kind of take every game individually by itself and not let it turn into a snowball effect. And they righted the ship and won the next 2 games, and then we started to go on a roll from there. And I think that helped us quite a bit, because as we got into the NCAA tournament, we were the 1 seed. We were hosting a regional, and in the very first game that we play in the tournament, we get absolutely waxed by Point Loma in San Diego. We gave up like 20 runs in that game, and it was kind of like, going back to that same moment in February where it was like, hey, it's 1 game, and we're still a pretty dang good team, and we turned it around and won the next 2 games to win the regional, and then rode 2 more games through the super regional, and just kind of kept the winning going all the way into the World Series.
You mentioned that on paper you had, a very talented team, so you were excited. And, I've heard other coaches talk about this, but how do you evaluate talent? Because I'm sure you've had teams in the past that were very talented, and whether it's pitching or hitting or fielding. So what made this team jump out to you on paper?
We had a little bit of everything. We weren't a one-dimensional kind of team, and there's been a lot of teams where maybe we can pitch, but we're just okay offensively, or vice versa. But this team, it was like, gosh, we had a pretty deep pitching staff. It looked like we had some high-end pitching. We were super athletic offensively. We could hit for power. We could run. We had some positional depth, so if guys got hurt, then we weren't going to lose much by putting the next guy in. There just weren't a lot of weaknesses looking at the lineup, the roster. And that was exciting, because, at our level, I think it's pretty rare to be able to get all of it. Usually there's going to be a couple holes here and there, and you got to figure out how to manage through them and play to your strengths. But, this was a team that kind of had everything. And I think that, a lot of things have to go right to have the season that we had. But, having a well-rounded team that can play at a high level in every facet of the game was pretty special.
How much is too much? Do you believe that kids should be playing year-round?
Yeah, I think there's advantages and disadvantages to it. And I kind of get the collegiate coach perspective. My oldest son just graduated high school, and he's coming to pitch for me next year at NNU. And I coached his team the last 4 years, through the summer and fall. And so I kind of got a perspective from both ends of it a little bit. I grew up in Southern California, and baseball is year-round there, and it didn't always used to be that way, but it definitely became that way. And I think the advantage to playing year-round is that you just get more reps. You start to understand the game a little bit better. Your baseball IQ may be a tick higher, but I feel like kids, they might develop faster, but they also kind of max out a little faster. And that's what I noticed about the kids up here in the Northwest, is that there's a lot of multi-sport athletes, Part of it's a necessity because of weather. Like, you're just not going to be outside in the winter months playing baseball games. So you play football in the fall, you play basketball in the winter. Um, and what I notice is that guys tend to be a little bit bigger and stronger and more physical because they're playing, more physical sports. They're probably spending more time in the weight room. They might be a tick behind in terms of baseball IQ or development, um, but their ceiling is still fairly high, and they come with other characteristics that I value. I would assume other coaches value, like, when you're a part of a team in multiple sports, you understand the team dynamic. You understand, you understand the game from a different perspective. Like, maybe it's the aggression, that you get from football, and being able to be an aggressive baseball player as a result, or just the sheer physicality of the two. The conditioning of basketball. Like, there's a lot of aspects to playing other sports that I think benefit you as a baseball player. Not to mention just the experience. I think kids will have a tendency to burn out a little faster if they specialize too early. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more fun in the experience of playing multiple sports and being around different kids. And I think it helps with skill development. And as I'm recruiting as a college coach, like, I prefer it. It's not a necessity or a requirement, but if I find out a kid's playing water polo or he's a football player in the fall, like, I think that's great, because I think that he's gonna come to us with just other developed characteristics that kids that play year round may not have.
What type of players do you recruit? Do you recruit high character guys that show a little bit of leadership, 4.0 guys, strictly baseball athletics? What's your mindset when you're recruiting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different aspects to that. As far as on the field and ability and talent, like, we're typically just looking for baseball players, right? There's a lot of coaches, a lot of programs out there that are just recruiting tools. And maybe they lack a little bit of the baseball IQ or the polished baseball abilities, but they feel like they have tools that maybe they can develop and polish them up a little bit. I think it's great if we can have a guy that has some elite tools, but they don't always translate, to success or to winning. And so we tend to just look for baseball players, gritty, hardworking, athletic kids. And if they can just flat out play the game, then they're going to fit in, and we're going to be able to develop them, further. We'll be able to increase the arm strength or the speed or the offensive approach, whatever it may be. Like, we're going to polish them up and make them better baseball players. But because they're such good gritty players, they can play now. I think off the field or on the field for that matter, like, we like guys with high motors. That's just kind of who we are in our culture. Like, we're kind of loud, we have fun. It's part of who we are, and part of our chemistry is that we're not going to be military like necessarily. I mean, we have standards and we keep our guys accountable to the standards, but at the same time, like, it's a game, and we want to have fun and enjoy ourselves. And
Yeah.
and that's what I've heard from a lot of people who have seen us play for the first time is they go, man, you guys just look like you're having a lot of fun out there. And that's the goal, so we want guys that have a little personality, and they're positive, and they have high motors. They're on and off the field quickly, and and then from the academic side, I mean, that there's no question. Like, I was just having this conversation the other day. Like, when I was growing up, like, you hear it all the time about how important your grades are, and as a kid, the tendency was to just blow it off, like, oh, if I'm a good enough baseball player, like, it's not going to matter. And I think a lot of kids sometimes have that mindset, and they don't understand the benefits to having good grades. It's not just to get recruited, but it's to make college affordable. And
Yeah.
there's just so much money in academic awards at especially places like our school. Most of the time kids are getting bigger academic scholarships than they are baseball scholarships, and we can combine the two, but the reality is the academic award is generally bigger than the baseball award. And so, that goes a long way in the recruiting process. Like, we're constantly looking for guys that are in that 3.8 to 4.0 range, because it means they're going to get a pretty solid financial package, which means we have a much better chance of getting them to our school. And I've noticed in my 20 plus years of coaching college baseball that there's a direct correlation usually between work ethic. When it comes to a guy with a high GPA, that means he's probably putting in the work to get that GPA, which means it translates to how much work he's putting in on the field and in the weight room. And the same could be said with guys that have low GPAs. Like, it's not usually just like oh, he's not good at taking tests. Like, it's usually like he's just not putting the work in, and that means we're getting the same result on the baseball field.
Where do you find your recruits? I mean, I see showcases, perfect game showcases, NCS showcases. Do you look at those things for players, or how do you find your players?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that because of where we're at and where we're located, like, we have to cast a pretty wide net. And so if you look at our roster, we're pretty diverse. We're California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, in addition to the Northwest. So part of that is, I'm from Southern California and have built a pretty solid network down in that area. And so I got a handful of coaches I can reach out to and rely on for solid recommendations, and I trust them. And then my pitching coach, Matt Hollett, he's from Washington and has a pretty good network up here in the Northwest, and so we can do the same. So a big part of our recruiting is really just who we know. And outside of that, we definitely will go to some of the bigger events up here in the Northwest. Baseball Northwest is one of those that they've been around for a really long time, and they do a good job evaluating players all throughout the Northwest. And then they hold a big tournament in early August, where you can see a lot of the better players from Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, the Pac Northwest Games is another event in July that's very similar. So we can see a lot of the better players from the Northwest over those two events. And then there's another company called PBR, and they run events nationally, but they have their own little state evals and camps where they evaluate kids and post everything online. And we'll host one or two events at our place for them, which allows us to be able to see a lot of the Idaho kids. And but it also, their database gives us an opportunity just to watch video and see some metrics on kids from out of our area. And we don't put as much stock into metric data as other places might. I think it's, it gives you some information, but it definitely doesn't give you all the information in terms of, like I said, like, we want to know if the kid's just a baseball player or not. And just because he has a certain exit velo or he can throw a certain miles an hour off the mound into a net somewhere, like, that doesn't necessarily translate into being able to be successful on the baseball field. I think it helps. It shows that there's some tools, again, that you can work with. But so I think there's value to some of these showcases and recruiting services. There's no question. But at the same time, like, we want to be able to watch them play games and not just recruit strictly off metrics.
How do you measure a kid's baseball IQ? Do you just watch them as they're playing and just kind of watch their movements, and you can kind of get a insight to what their mind's thinking? Or how do overall, how do you measure their IQ, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say in the recruiting process, watching games is the easiest way, because and for me, like, I'm going to measure it based on, like, from a defensive standpoint, is he making the right play? Is he throwing the ball to the right place? Like an outfielder, is he sailing relay guys because he's just trying to show off an arm or make the big play instead of making the smart play? And the same can be said for infielders. Like, are they making the right play? Are they throwing to the right base? Are they backing up bases? Are they in the right place at the right time? And those are things that I think you need to see in a game to really have it stick out. Once we have kids on our campus, on our team, you practice a lot of those things, and you find out how quickly guys can pick it up.
Hmm.
And the guys that pick it up really quickly, they probably have a pretty general idea, like, going into it. They're not having to learn it for the first time. And the same can be said just in having conversations when you're kind of breaking down specific first and third plays or bunt defense. Like, if they start asking some pretty good questions, then you can see the wheels turning and understanding, okay, they're starting to grasp some of these things. Offensive approach, kind of the same thing. Like, yeah, I think seeing them in games is very helpful for that.
What I've heard over the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years is not many colleges recruit straight from high school because of the portal. Is that what you're experiencing from the college perspective? Is looking at the portal first, or are there high school guys that just jump out and you go, man, we're gonna take a shot at this guy?
Yeah, I would say that varies from level to level, and it also varies from school to school, especially at the Division 1 level. Like, I've had conversations with a lot of Division 1 coaches over the last several months, and there's been a lot of changes at the Division 1 level in terms of scholarshiping and NIL money and roster size, and I mean all kinds of things. So it's constantly changing, but it seems like there's a definite shift at that level to recruit older guys versus younger guys. I think some programs, it's a more drastic shift than others. I think high school recruiting is still always going to be the lifeblood of most programs, because it's just not sustainable to constantly turn your roster over every single year with 20 new players. Like, it's going to be hard to stay a good program that way. You might catch lightning in a bottle once in a while, but the reality is you got to have high school kids that you can kind of develop and grow your culture with over the course of 3 or 4 years. um, that's the best way to make it sustainable. So at the Division 1 level, what I'm noticing is like an average probably of recruiting classes, maybe having like 2 less high school kids than usual. I mean, they're definitely still recruiting high school kids, but it might be 1 or 2 less kids per class than what they used to do. And they're replacing those with older kids from the portal. So, 1 or 2 kids in one school's recruiting class may not seem like a big deal, but when you like broaden that out over 300 Division 1 schools, then yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty drastic deal.
Hmm.
That's a lot of kids that maybe were being recruited by Division 1 schools that are no longer.
Hmm.
Um, and so what I've noticed in some ways is that it's helped programs like ours at the Division 2 level. It seems like there's more high school kids out there now that maybe, like I said, we're going Division 1 that now are getting passed on or overlooked, and so it's helped our recruiting pool a little bit. But at the same time, like, we still have to recruit older guys too. Like, we can't just
Hmm.
recruit 100% high school kids. It's just a really hard thing to do and be successful. Sometimes you have holes that you need to plug with an older kid right away because a younger returning guy he's not ready to play at that level yet. He still needs more time to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's still changing. I don't think it's settled down by any means, and the
Hmm.
next couple years are still good. I mean, we all thought the whole COVID effect on recruiting was over like 2 years ago, and it's still lingering and having an impact in some ways. So I think it's going to be a little while before things start to settle down.
What's the biggest difference between D1, D2? I think if you talk to 10 high school athletes, they have D1 aspirations. Um, I'm a believer of, if you want to play college sports, there is a college for you, whether it's JUCO or whether it's D3, NIIA or D2. But what's the biggest difference as far as player development, just the overall landscape between D1 and D2?
Yeah, I think that there's I don't want to say there's a talent difference. I think that the upper tier of Division 1 is its own class. Like, there's just no question. Like, look at the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC, like that. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 80 schools at the Division I level that are just in their own class above everybody else. You start to get into that middle and lower tier of Division I baseball, and it starts to look very similar to the upper tier of Division II baseball as far as talent and ability goes. You know, the one area it might differ would be maybe facilities. I think some of those, you know, mid-level Division I schools have nicer facilities potentially, because they still have football programs and they're still generating some revenue, and so there's a little more money to play with. But from an ability and talent standpoint, I think it's very similar as you start to hit the middle, low-level Division I and upper-level Division II. The biggest difference that I'm seeing nowadays is that, you know, baseball players all want to play professional baseball. It's kind of rare for our sport, I think, compared to other sports, in that there's just so much opportunity professionally within baseball versus basketball or football or whatever. And every baseball player thinks he's a pro baseball player. Like, it's just, it doesn't matter where you come from or how good you are. Every one of them thinks they're going to play professional baseball, which is great. You know, like, I love kids that are goal oriented and they're determined, and you know, there's a lot you can do with that. But the reality is, you know, the draft went from 60 rounds at one point to 50 rounds to 40 rounds, and now they're at 20 rounds. I mean, it's a third of what it used to be, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. And most draft picks are coming from Division I schools. That's just, it's the reality. You know, and I would say the second level is probably a high school, you know, just the high-end high school kids. So for us, you know, we're constantly trying to tell kids, like, the experience and the opportunity to win, in my opinion, far outweighs the opportunity to just play Division I baseball. You know, and we've had kids, even this last year, we had, I think, 3 or 4 kids that had come to us from Division I schools that hadn't really experienced winning a whole lot. And all of a sudden they get into this environment where they're winning all the time, and they're in the postseason and they're in the World Series. And it was the best year of baseball that they've ever experienced. And, you know, had they had the chance to come back, I think they would have. You know, all 3 of those guys ended up going back to Division I schools this year because they had to, because they ran out of Division II eligibility. But I honestly think they would have stayed had they had the chance to play one more year of Division II baseball, because they enjoyed winning. It was a great fit for them, and guys who are super competitive. And that's part of why I think you see so much action in the transfer portal, is that it's hard to be a kid coming from a winning program and then you go somewhere where you don't win. It's not fun, you know, and you could say I played Division I baseball, but, you know, I played 4 losing seasons somewhere. I mean, that's not a great experience. So I think, you know, as we're spreading the word in the recruiting process to a lot of high school kids, it's like, you can't fall in love with the D1 thing. Like, if you have the opportunity to play and it's at a good fit for you, then you should take it. Absolutely. But the fit should far outweigh the title, you know, or the status, because it's going to make for a far better experience in the long run.
You know, you had an opportunity to coach your son. Your son's going to come play for you. So as you put your dad hat on, you know, walk me through, you know, as a dad and his coach, how did you separate the two? And then, you know, how did he separate the two? Because, you know, I'm sure from a coaching perspective, there's, you know, some discipline there, there's instruction there. And when I try to coach my kids, I know sometimes they don't want to hear my voice. And so how did you balance that?
Yeah, I had fun with it, first and foremost, you know, because it meant I got to hang out with him. And you know, the previous few years I tried to be hands off, you know, and just let other people coach him, because I wanted him to be able to hear somebody else's voice and learn how to respect a coach. And you know, that was very interesting, because you know, early in his years growing up, he's being coached by you know, dads or people that may not know the game as well, and so they might be teaching him something different than what I'm teaching him. And that was a great dynamic to be able to learn to respect somebody and say yes coach and do what they tell you to do, but and then at the same time, come ask me the question like, hey, this is what so and so is telling me, what should I be doing, this, what do you think? And learning how to manage through different philosophies or different teaching styles. And I think it was great for his character development growing up. And then when I got to start coaching him, I think he always saw me as dad,
Mhm.
whereas all the other kids on the team saw me as the NNU head coach, right? So there was like
Mhm.
a really solid level of respect from all of his teammates for me. And I think that kind of changed his perspective from just playing for my dad to like, wow, everybody thinks he's a pretty good coach. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to him, and that helped. Um, and through the recruiting process, his mom and I, obviously we know what NNU's about. We both played and coached at Point Loma Nazarene in San Diego for a long time. Like, we've been part of small private Christian education for a long time. Like, we understand the value and all of the recruiting and everything that goes into it. So we always were hoping he'd want to come to NNU, but we left it totally wide open to him to kind of explore his options. And I even let the recruiting piece of it kind of be handled by my pitching coach, Matt, because I didn't want it to be like, I'm just bringing my own kid on just cause.
Mhm.
So I think that helped because it was like he was being recruited by NNU for real, not just by dad.
Yeah.
And he had several other options and opportunities, and we would have been fine with him going wherever he wanted to go. And in the long run, he ended up wanting to go to NNU, which was great. And so now I think the real interesting part is going to happen over the next 4 years. Like, coaching a travel ball team is one thing when you have 12 kids on the team and everybody's going to probably play. And now
Mhm.
it's going to get real interesting where you got 40 kids out there, and is he one of the better kids? Is he not one of the better kids? Is he going to get innings? Is he not going to get innings? Like, now we're going to really find out.
From a pitching standpoint for kids, we've heard from a dad's perspective, don't throw curveballs. We're staying away from curveballs. But I've also read from Tommy John, from players that had Tommy John in the MLB, a lot of them had microfiber tears from throwing high velo. So what is your, perspective on kids throwing benders or throwing curveballs or throwing changeups and fastballs only? Kind of what is your thought around, that pitch?
Yeah, I've always been an advocate for it, to be honest. And I don't know if I'm in the minority or not. But like, even my 11-year-old, he's playing baseball, and we've spent the last year or two learning how to throw that pitch because I think there's value in learning it early, and
Mhm.
then it's going to continue to develop, and you're going to continue to have better feel for it as you get older, as opposed to trying to learn it as like a 14-year-old or 15-year-old. I just feel like you're going to be a little bit behind. And we've heard a lot of research on it that I don't know that there's any actual scientific evidence that says throwing curveballs hurt your arm.
Yeah.
In reality, I like you mentioned, I think high velocity and arm speed, when your body's not ready for it, it probably weighs more into injury. And guys that throw split fingers, I think that's a pitch that puts a lot of strain on your elbow, and that's probably why you don't see a lot of guys who throw that pitch anymore for that reason. Because of the correlation to elbow injuries. But the reality is, I think most guys that get hurt, it's more because their body's moving in a way it shouldn't be, or it's not ready to.
Mhm.
Whether their strength gains are happening ultra quickly, and they're just not used to being able to manage that workload. Some of it is just like continual overuse, just too much throwing and not enough rest and recovery.
Mhm.
Um, and then just straight up mechanics. Some guys just don't throw properly, and it puts them in bad positions. So I don't necessarily think that the curveball or breaking balls have any kind of direct correlation to injury. And so I've always been a fan of, hey, I'm gonna teach them how to throw it the right way, and I want them to play catch with it and learn how to throw it to a spot, and because it's just going to help them as they get older, and it's going to be a more valuable pitch.
If you had to give an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 3 tips on how to make it to the college level, especially for those kids that have that aspiration, what would those 3 tips be?
I would say number one, fall in love with the weight room, because I think that, like I said earlier, I think, some kids, they play so much baseball, they neglect the opportunity to be in the weight room and strength gain. And for me, that's one of the biggest separators I see between high school kids and college kids is strength. And when we recruit high school kids, we're really weighing out, like, can this 18-year-old kid step on the field with 21, 22-year-olds and compete? And it's usually not a skill difference, it's a strength difference. And so guys that can fall in love with the weight room at an early age, and 11 and 12 might be too young, but at least getting them in love with the concept. And then as they get older, starting to introduce, more and more to them. I think that goes a long way. Being an exceptional teammate, I think, is another one. It opens up so many doors for kids when you can be well liked by your teammates, by your coaches. Everybody's going to have something good to say about you, and it stands out on the field in the recruiting process. But just being a great teammate, being a servant, and all of that translates to being a leader, is really what it comes down to. And then lastly, I would say, it's hard in Idaho to get recruited. I'm talking specifically to Idaho kids, but being willing to identify schools in the recruiting process that have something that you value, something that interests you, and then making an effort to get to those places and get in front of those coaches, because I think it's hard to just get recruited blindly by going to random events and just hope somebody finds you. It's a little more beneficial to spend money on going specifically to 4 or 5 places that you really, really, could see yourself fitting and wanting to be at, and then getting in front of those coaches specifically. That tends to be a better route usually.
Man, I really appreciate the time that you've given me.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was fun.